So to practice perm wrapping, you can just put 2 working parts to create a center panel. And when you start with your center panel, just section across at the apex, the highest point of the head, and start practicing your perm rods and work down this center panel. So to start a perm rod, once you have your 2 working parts in and you have your panel, you're going to want to target part. So place your finger where you want to go and target part to your finger. The section should be slightly narrower than the length of a rod, but just slightly, and it should be the diameter of the rod that you're using. So if you're using pink rods, this is going to be acceptable. If we were using a gray rod, we might have to go a little bit wider subsection. So always remember, the larger the rod, the larger your subsection. Just match it up with your diameter. Once you're done that, comb to form a pocket, and try and get into the habit of combing once really good. Comb once like you mean it. Once you've got that in position, you can use whichever end wrap you would like, and remember, always bring that right to the end paper, right to the ends. You do not want any hair protruding past the end wrap. And then get your fingers rolling around. This finger, I like to keep this finger on top until I reach the point where the rod is going to roll away from my finger. As I'm rolling, also you can move that hair, spool it onto your rod. So by rocking it back and forth a little bit, that rock and roll motion allows the hair to spool onto the rod. Always let your elastic go and then bring it across the top of the rod. You don't want your elastic to be tucked right in close to the scalp, because this could leave a line of demarcation, a dent in the hair when you put your perm solution on. And you don't want your elastic to be twisted in any way. So this elastic needs to be nice and straight as you secure it. You don't want any twists in the elastic, because if there are twists, those can indent the hair as well. So we just target part. Just to review again, I'm going to try from a different angle and do another one. Okay, so remember, nice clean horizontal section, target part. Comb that hair up once like you mean it. Use your bookend wrap. Make sure the ends of the hair are in that perm rod nice and flat, and they're not protruding past your end paper. You'll notice the position of my palm. My palm is up. It's facing up. This allows us to get the right base placement, the base control on our rod. So if I'm doing half base, I'm always going to be accurate and at half base if my palm is up. Gives us a little more control. Remember to rock and roll your way down to the scalp. Let this elastic go, because it may have twisted in your hand, and place it straight across. Your rod should be able to move, because remember, when perm solution goes on here, you don't want them to be so tight that when the perm solution softens and swells the hair, there's no room for expansion. So you do want it to have some movement. You want to be able to see your elastic, but you want control, even tension. So again, target part, comb it once like you mean it. Your end paper on, right to the ends. Make sure there's no protrusion of hair past those ends, past the end paper, I mean. Roll it up, rock and roll all the way to the scalp. Let the strand, the elastic go, so that you have a nice straight elastic and good even tension. Your base placement could be on base, half base, or off base. A lot of times half base is the safest, because if we place this at a half base placement, we will not have as much tension on the hair. It just is a little bit more forgiving. The on base placement gives a strong curl right to the scalp, like right near the root of the hair, the scalp area of the hair, I shouldn't say root, right near the scalp. But the problem is within a couple of weeks the hair grows anyways, so I always think it's better to use the half base placement. The base direction, we can go horizontal, we can also wrap vertically, we can also wrap diagonally, and we can wrap forward or back. In this case, when you're practicing, it's good to just keep horizontal and back. Keep it simple. The wrapping technique we're using is the crokinole wrapping technique, and we're wrapping from ends to scalp when we use that technique. And remember, it is important to keep your palm up for good control and to maintain accurate base placement. This is extremely important up until you reach the top of the occipital bone. Once you reach the top of the occipital bone, you can change, but I think it's important to always have the same technique that you're using all the time. So if you can keep that palm up, that's really good. Use your technique of target parting when you're sectioning. It gives you nice clean sections. When you bring these ends together, remember, don't ever scrunch them up, because it'll be hard for the perm solution to evenly saturate the ends. So you want to make sure that you are bringing those ends together for control, but they're still flat. And when you put the end paper on, you can see in the end paper that you have a nice flat surface for the perm solution to absorb. Remember to keep your comb in your hand, and when you want to assess how you've done, there are a number of things that you can look at. So when we're looking at our perm rod assessment, the first thing we're going to look at is our section the right size? So remember, your section needs to be the length slightly shorter than the length of the rod, just a little bit on each side. You also want to make sure that your subsections are correct. And remember, we use the diameter of the rod that we're using to determine the subsection. We also want to make sure that our sectioning is nice and neat. And if you practice your target parting, that's not going to be an issue. We want to make sure when we wrap the whole head that all the hair is in a perm rod. We don't want to have some hair hanging down. We want to make sure that we have combed the hair from root to ends. So right from the scalp area to the ends, we want to make sure we've combed it and distributed it evenly in the end paper, and remember, not scrunched. And we want to make sure our tension is even. It looks like it's been spooled onto the perm rod, not loose in some sections and tight in other sections. We want to make sure that our base placement is the same. So for example, we don't want to start off with on base and switch to off base. We want, if we're using half base placement, that's important that we maintain that throughout the entire perm wrap. We also want to make sure that we're following the head shape and we're using the correct end wrap for the type of hair. So a bookend wrap is probably not something I would use if I was doing a spiral perm. I would probably use the vertical bookend wrap, but not the horizontal bookend wrap. We also want to make sure our elastics are positioned correctly. We can see the elastics and they're not tucked way in, because if we tuck them so far in, they can dent the hair as the hair expands, and that can leave a line of demarcation. It can even break the hair sometimes, but sometimes if it gets that little dent in it, the line of demarcation, that can lead to breakage. So in a couple of weeks, when the client's shampooing and brushing their hair or using any hot tools on their hair or blow drying, where that weak spot is, it can lead to breakage. So we don't want that to happen. And when you're all done your perm wrap, you do want to take a few rods out, and you want to check to make sure that you don't have any fish hook ends, that all the ends, the hair, is in an end paper. Anything protruding past is going to give you that curly look with a straight piece and then a little curl, which resembles a fish hook. So remember, there's a lot to consider when permanent waving happens. We're readjusting the disulfide bonds or sulfur bonds in permanent waving, so it's very important that everything is wrapped perfectly and we're not going to cause damage or breakage to a client's hair. So this is something you want to practice often. So remember, 2 working parts to create your center panel. Start at your apex and just continue to wrap, wrap, wrap. And time yourself as you're wrapping and see if you can improve your timing. Maybe it'll take you 15 minutes to wrap this, 20 minutes to wrap it the first time. And then after that, maybe set a goal for yourself. I want to be able to wrap this in 5 minutes. And keep timing yourself. So that's a little bit about perm wrapping. We're going to be doing a number of different perm wrapping techniques, and this is just how you can practice perm wrapping before we get into the techniques.